Have you ever felt like no matter what you do, the same pattern keeps repeating, the same financial collapse, the same relationship destruction, the same health decline, as if something bigger is holding you in a loop you cannot break? Most people never consider that a curse could be the reason. They blame their mindset, their trauma, their circumstance. They keep working on themselves and wondering why nothing shifts. But a curse, whether it's a bloodline, generational, land-based, or personal, creates an overarching restriction that no amount of manifestation work will override. It literally repeats history. And until the underlying interference is addressed, the pattern will not stop. I'm Tracey Gillies, and I've spent the last decade commanding and releasing demonic and multidimensional entity interference at the highest levels. I literally wrote the book on it. And in this episode, I'm walking you through the different types of curses, how they operate through demonic and multidimensional realms, and why they could be the silent force that has been ruining your life. So what actually is a curse? Although often overlooked, curses function much like an implant, and they're directives that are embedded into a person's field designed to create ongoing suffering and manipulation. And curses may originate in past lifetimes, or they could be passed down through bloodlines, or they can be placed by high multidimensional beings. They can appear as reoccurring misfortune, ongoing health struggles, financial restriction, destructive relationships, or simply feeling that no matter what you do, you cannot move beyond a certain point. And what people don't necessarily understand is that a curse can exist on many different levels and manifest in a magnitude of ways. And the power of a curse often depends on the strength, authority, and spiritual capacity of the person or the being who created it or invoked it. So words can actually become so much more powerful depending on the person who's using them. Some people know exactly what they're doing, unfortunately. They understand that they're inflicting what I would describe as a level of spiritual attack. In fact, it's more common than you would realize, especially in energy and spiritual healing circles. Other people can be incredibly careless with their words, their intention, their anger, or their hatred. But regardless of whether someone consciously or unconsciously understands what they're doing, what matters is what forces are attached to that person, or what level of power or authority sits behind the words. This is why I don't ever look at every curse as being the same. There's so much more information attached to one. You could have two people say exactly the same words, and energetically they could have completely different consequences. And one of the most destructive aspects of curses, in my experience, is the ability to travel through bloodlines. A curse may initially be placed upon one person, but its energetic signature can just carry on through generations. So now you're not just looking at what happened to one individual, you're looking at repeating patterns with an entire family line. Maybe women within a family can never create success. Maybe every time somebody begins to create financial abundance, something happens and they lose it. Maybe relationships repeat endlessly, like in betrayal. Maybe they're going ongoing patterns of abuse. Maybe health seems to decline through every generation. And maybe people continually get to a certain level of success and then everything collapses. I see it all the time. People can spend their entire lives trying to fix these individual problems without ever considering where there is an overarching restriction connecting all of them. They'll work on their money beliefs. They'll work on their relationship trauma. They'll work on their health, and they'll work on manifestation, and they'll work on their childhood. I'm not saying that all of those things obviously aren't significant or important. They absolutely can be. But what happens when the restriction isn't sitting there? So what happens when you're endlessly in the weeds of healing because the actual restriction exists at a completely different level? This is where understanding why a curse exists becomes incredibly important, because understanding the curse and why it is there is one of the first steps in trying to dismantle it. At their core, I see curses as energetic programs deeply coded into a person's field. Once established, they become self-perpetuating, consciously drawing in circumstances, relationships, experiences, and interferences that reinforce the original limitation. It's almost like Groundhog Day on repeat. And unlike what I would describe as a standard energetic implant or device, curses can be infused with enormous amounts of emotion, intent, and ritual power. This can make them far more deeply rooted. They can also be associated with powerful acts. Things such as desecrating sacred land, breaking an oath, betraying what is understood as divine law, or harming somebody or somebody considered to hold significant spiritual authority, even offending somebody. What I want to give you now is an example of this, probably because it's one of the most profound experiences that I had working with a bloodline curse. And it was one of the first experiences that led me to also understand that there's this kind of higher curse that can affect a person's whole entire life. I had a client that came to me initially. She came to me for a property clearing, and she had a long history of struggle. Interestingly, she was actually a transformation coach herself. And yet when she looked at her life, it kind of just seemed to be missing, key elements. No matter what she did, she felt plagued by misfortune. She couldn't seem to get ahead financially. Her health had declined rapidly. All areas of her life had fallen into disempowerment, and she was endlessly doing healing work. She kind of initially thought the problem was connected to her property. I think she also thought it was almost like money beliefs. And she wanted me to look at those things. So she asked me to clear her property because she just couldn't put two and two together. It just didn't add up with the amount of healing that she'd done. So she said, okay, maybe it's a property issue. Can I work on her property? But when she started sharing more of her story with me, I instantly knew that it wasn't even about her property. Like I could instantly see that. She explained that everything had begun to unravel after her father had purchased a piece of land. The land actually held Aboriginal significance and contained sacred rocks. So there was these sacred rocks, and he had been very clearly told not to move the rocks. And he knew that they were, significant Aboriginal heritage and all of these things, and that they were not to be touched. But obviously, he wanted to develop the land. So he had been warned, and also warned that there could be this serious consequence, but he didn't listen. And from what was explained to me, once he kind of removed the rocks, it's like he had desecrated sacred law and order, sacred land. It's one of the worst things that you can actually do. In fact, a lot of properties can hold a lot of restriction. People don't even realize they're doing these things. So he was obviously trying to get financial gain, was the driving force behind what had happened. And he went ahead with the development. And from that point on, she just said his whole life collapsed, right? So his whole life collapsed. The development had issue after issue after issue. He lost vast amounts of money, and his health deteriorated. And eventually he actually lost everything. But there was another layer to the story. She actually told me that her name had been attached to the development, even though she had not actively participated in what had happened. So, but she had an interlink. Obviously, he was her father. And then in my interpretation of what I found as I went through the healing work, she'd become entangled with the consequence of what had occurred. So when she originally actually asked me to clear the property, something in me knew at that point in time that I couldn't charge her. I just knew that I couldn't charge her a fee, or I wouldn't actually be able to do the clearing work. And I didn't really understand at that point in time why, but I just always trusted my intuition. And as I was working, I've just over time worked with higher level restrictions over and over. And sometimes there was lessons and learning in it for me. So at this point in time, I did actually know her through a friend. So I kind of said, hey, listen, I can't charge you. Obviously, she would have been very happy to hear that and just be like, oh, that's amazing. But energetically, at the point in time, I just knew that I needed to, not charge and work in the energetic. So I just trusted what I was receiving. And so what then occurred later on, my understanding was that because the original situation involved land, like sacred land, desecration for monetary gain, I couldn't financially profit to attempt to resolve it because it would have held a similar energetic tonality. And again, I wouldn't have been granted permission to work in that sacred reordering way to actually resolve that situation. So as I started working, this was kind of a fundamental kind of step for me to start working in these higher matrices and understand curses that can exist almost out of like outside of time and space. So I went to clear the property, but it wasn't actually about the property at all. It was about her bloodline. And I actually found that there was a curse, but it was not a normal curse. It was a bloodline curse. So it was obviously put on the father, but it extended obviously through the bloodline to her. So I then realized that it wasn't actually in her divinity matrix. So you kind of have your soul template, right? It didn't sit in there. It sat in a higher matrix, one that will almost like hold instruction and then replicate that through her connection. So no matter what healing work she did, she wouldn't have been able to find the anchor points because it actually wasn't in her template. So it was quite complicated. And because somebody will endlessly work on unconscious beliefs, they'll be working on trauma, they'll be working on soul contracts, they'll be doing all the manifestation work, but it doesn't matter. So they could be doing healing after healing after healing, but the overarching restriction is sitting elsewhere, right? So they can endlessly be in the weeds of healing without ever reaching what is actually the controlling, the pattern of that curse and that just life and not being able to manifest or create. So what happened was I realized that the curse was placed in an overarching higher matrix. And at this point in time, I hadn't worked in these fields of information. It's actually taken me years and years and years to develop the ability to work with such high frequency. Like, I don't know if people don't really understand frequency at points in time. You actually have to be able to almost hold that frequency within your own structures. And so there's been times that I've attuned to working with higher frequency. It's actually made me quite sick in the re-regulation to actually start to work with it. It's like I've had to change my body, even my neurological capacity to be able to do that. So what happened was I saw that there was this higher matrix. And I was told that I could go and release this bloodline curse. There was almost gatekeepers of this realm. And I was told if I could find the restriction, I could release it. But it was almost like a good luck with that, you know. And I was like, oh, okay, I obviously have to work out how to do this because at this point in time, I wasn't sure. And I started working in this field of information. And to be honest with you, it made me so sick. It was so high, the frequency. I was like, there's no way I can even sit in this field of information. I'm just not going to be able to do this. And then I had this knowing come through. I actually have this beautiful necklace that I created. It was actually a crystal, like a stone that I was given. And it was from sacred Aboriginal energetics and sacred law. Over the time in my journey, I often get given almost like, I don't even know what to call them. It's almost like energetic gifts. It's almost like information energetically, and it holds higher wisdom and higher knowing, but it's almost like, I don't know, an honoring potentially of like my path and my spiritual authority and all these things. Quite often I just keep them for myself. Sometimes I'll then lead me into like working with more healing and I kind of create things with the frequencies. But at this point in time, I had this beautiful crystal and I had made it into a necklace for myself. And so I just got this knowing that I needed to put the necklace on. So I put the necklace on and I went back to the higher matrices that I was trying to work in. And because the necklace held the same energetics of sacred order and sacred law that had been desecrated through the Aboriginal, like, you know, the land that held that reference with sacred rocks. It was almost like I was given this acknowledgement by the gatekeepers, and I was then shown how to release from this matrix. So that led me to be working in these higher matrix. So they overarch everything in creation. And, you know, a lot of people still also have that idea that light always wins and that light beings will just come in and re-regulate anything. These matrices really any powerful being can put instruction that will create an overarching ruling into it. Doesn't matter if it's a light being or a dark being, they've kind of earned the power to work in those matrices. So through that process, I was able to kind of release and dismantle this bloodline curse. And then what happened after that point in time was extraordinary. She actually said to me her circumstances began to change really quickly. I think she said she ended up bringing in a whole lot of new coaching clients instantly. She reported greater abundance beginning to flow with her work, improvements in her health, and areas that had felt blocked for years beginning to move again. So I'm sharing that story because it's really about the fundamentally, like that story for me changed the way that I looked at curses, changed the way that I understood that there could be these higher reference points that, again, people can miss because they're actually working in the wrong templates, and how an overarching ruling or energetic program can supersede everything. And it just showed me why somebody could be doing enormous amounts of healing and still feel like they're not getting anywhere because they can't find the overarching restriction or the anchor point that holds it all in place. And when you're talking about a bloodline curse, that anchor point may go back generations. It might not even started with you. It could have started with your mother, your grandmother, your great-grandmother, or generations before them, and yet you're the person living out the pattern. If any of what I'm saying here is resonating with you and you think you might have some type of entity interference and you want to understand entity interference in a deeper way, or you're looking to up-level your services or your skills as a healer and get fully certified in becoming an entity practitioner, please, my book, The Truth Behind Entity Interference, is the best place to start. You'll see that there's a link below in the show notes to get your copy. And this is why I also think it's important to understand that there are so many different expressions of a curse. You could have a bloodline curse. You can have what I call maybe an inherited or generational curse, a personal curse, or you could have curses associated with land or property. You can have curses and restrictions that are connected to past lifetime experiences. And you can have many different curses that are reinforced through either maybe demonic realms or multidimensional realms as well, multidimensional interference. And they don't all look the same, and they certainly don't all create the same consequence. Sometimes the pattern is obvious. You look through your family history and you think, my God, every woman in this family has experienced the same thing. Nobody can hold on to money. Nobody creates a healthy relationship. Everybody seems to experience betrayal. Everybody's business collapses at the same point in time. There can be almost like an invisible ceiling that nobody seems to be able to move beyond. And other times it's much more subtle. It's simply this sense of, why does this keep happening to me? I've done everything. I've worked on myself. I've changed my mindset. I've dealt with my trauma. I've done the manifestation. So why am I still stuck here? And this is why I think we need to become much more curious about repeating patterns. Instead of simply asking what's wrong with me, start asking, why does this pattern exist? Where did it begin? Does anyone else in my family carry it? Is there an event that seems to have started it? Is there a particular generation where everything changed? Is there association with land? Is there an oath, agreement, betrayal, or historic event connected to the family? Because once you begin to look at the pattern rather than simply the symptom, you may start seeing a completely different story. And ultimately, that's what I want people to understand from this episode. That a curse isn't simply somebody saying something nasty about you. It can be an overarching energetic restriction that has the potential to influence generations. And if you only ever work underneath that restriction, you simply spend years trying to change individual symptoms while the overarching programs remain untouched. For me, healing is about getting to the highest point of influence possible, not endless clearing the same thing, not endlessly repeating the same trauma, but understanding what sits underneath it. Why is it there? What continues to reinforce it, and what needs to change for the pattern to finally stop? Because sometimes the thing you think is your pattern may actually be something much older than you. It might not even potentially belong to you. If you liked this episode, please subscribe or follow. And if you've got any questions, drop them in the comments below. And I'll see you in the next episode.